Welcome to Bed Crime Stories podcast. I'm your host, T. If you like all things true crime, if you like it delivered in a peaceful, tranquil manner, if you like it clear and concise without drama, then I highly recommend you subscribe. And if you like what you hear, please smash the like button. It's a free way you can help. And now, without further ado, let's dig in. Stephan Sterns' father, Chris Sterns, was interviewed by the police on July 16th of 2024, more than 5 months after Maddie was found deceased and after his son Stefan was arrested. Chris started his chat out with a bang, saying what a lot of people are thinking, and that is that he and his wife Debbie are surprised that Maddie's mother, Jenn Soto, hasn't been arrested yet. Chris said, 1, Jenn was there when Maddie died, and 2, she was involved in the attempt to cover up the crime. I think what he means by that is that Jenn Soto was home, but according to Jenn, she was downstairs in the master suite asleep. Wow. Chris's main mission seemed to be to try to throw Jenn Soto under the bus. And I don't think he wanted Jenn to go down with Stefan. I think he wants Jenn to be the one blamed and to somehow, I don't know how he could even imagine this, get Stefan off of all these charges. Chris asked the detective, "Where is Jenn? Why hasn't she been charged? Is she even still in the country? Is she in some institution?" Personally, I think that's a little rude and intrusive. That's just my opinion. I know a lot of people do not like Jenn Soto, and rightly so. We can definitely see some things that she is guilty of. Being neglectful, allowing Stephan Sterns too much access to her daughter. But doing Maddie in herself? No, I don't think so. Is this why Stephan Sterns has gotten away with so much bad behavior over the years? His inability to hold a job, to earn his own keep, jabbing someone with a sharp object and nearly getting them in the heart, and not being locked away for this? Taking photos under the bathroom door of his roommate's girlfriend and having his mommy pay the roommate off, allegedly, according to one of his friends. It sounds like Chris and Debbie are enablers and they want Jenn to go down. A lot of people do, but for some reason I feel like the parents of this serial SAer and accused unaliver should tone it down a bit and focus on the crimes that their son is accused of. The fact that their son had Maddie's lifeless body in their silver Lincoln sedan on the day she went missing, that's something to focus on. Am I wrong here? I know Jenn is guilty of not protecting her daughter, but we don't know that she played a role in Maddie's death. Chris makes it sound like Jenn was solely responsible for this death. Where does he get off? Chris said Stefan's not telling him and Debbie much upon the advice of his lawyer. Chris also stated that Stefan told him that he, quote, didn't start this, end quote. Chris then goes on to tell the detective that he believes Stefan and Jenn were both involved in a criminal enterprise. Chris tells the detective, think about Jenn's strange behavior when Maddie went missing. And he said, quote, the image that he recalls seeing of Maddie was shown to him by Jenn Soto. Now, apparently he was saying that this was a graphic photo of Maddie that Jenn had on her phone. So Chris was telling the detective that Jenn had an SA photo on her phone. The detective quickly shot Chris down. He said, we downloaded everything on Jenn's phone and there were no graphic images of Maddie. So the detective basically told Chris, "You're wrong. Boy, oh boy, are the Sterns gunning for Jenn Soto." Chris replies, "Oh, well, I must have envisioned it." I wonder if he meant to say he must have imagined it. So is Chris Sterns something of a pathological liar like his son? They say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Chris went on to say that a lot of packages arrived at his and Debbie's house in Northport on a regular basis, and those packages were for Stefan. And yet when Chris drove Stefan home in November, he apparently had no money. Chris says he told Stefan that the job that he had at Disney would take years and many promotions before he would get to the point where he could be self-sufficient. And Chris said he was stopping the subsidizing of Stefan's life. He wasn't going to pay for him anymore. Chris tells the detective that he said to Stefan, "You need to be making 2 times what you're making at Disney." And note, this was a job that Stefan did not get fired from. He quit. So it sounds like his father talked him into quitting the one job that he had held for any period of time. I mean, maybe if Stefan loved his job, he would have stuck with it and he would have gotten those promotions. They say that you should do what you love and you will always be successful and you won't work a day in your life. But Jenn told Chris on the day that Stefan was arrested that Stefan had often called in sick to work at Disney. This disappointed Chris, and he said when Stefan came back home to Northport, he fell back into the same BS behaviors he'd always demonstrated. Basically not working, sleeping late, having a messy room. Chris told the detective that he'd taken Stefan home to Northport because he wanted to help him find a viable career. But Stefan didn't seem to be too interested in that. Chris then asked Stefan how he was able to afford all these packages, and Stefan replied that he'd used his savings, but Chris knew that Stefan didn't have any savings. Some money he inherited, he spent right away on a pricey watch. Chris basically said that Stefan never even saved 2 nickels. Chris believed that Stefan had to be involved in a criminal enterprise with Jenn, and he mentioned it again and again. It feels to me like Chris wants to find some way to ensnare Jennifer in these crimes, but that's not really his job. Let the cops do the investigating. Don't come for me, but if you think about it, Jenn Soto in some ways is also a victim of Stephan Sterns. He manipulated her into believing her child was safe in his care, at least to some degree. I think she showed very bad judgment in allowing Maddie to sleep in the same bed with her and with Stefan, and even alone with Stefan. But I don't think that she was aware that Stefan was going to unalive her daughter. I don't want to make excuses for Jenn's poor parenting, but I do think that Stephan Sterns groomed her like he groomed her daughter. Call her neglectful, call her out for putting Maddie within the reach of a predator, call her out for completely dropping the ball by having Maddie sleep in the bed alone with Stefan. All despicable behaviors for sure, but to say she's the one who did Maddie in, I'm not buying that. And I think it's really low for Stefan's parents to go there. The detective told Chris, it does not look like Stefan and Jenn were working together. The detective went on to say that Stefan was working independently. The detective went on to tell Chris that on the thumb drive that he, Chris, handed over to the cops, there were those 35,000 images of child P, and it would be almost impossible to identify all of the individuals in those photos. It sounds like Stefan got these 35,000 images, likely off the dark web. It doesn't sound like he's the one who took the photos. And let me remind you, or let you know if you didn't know, None of those photos were of Maddie. The detective basically put Chris Sterns in his place, and he said, "Your son is the only one who had child pee on his devices." I think Stefan was maybe sharing his collection with others, again on the dark web. Chris then says to the detective, "Too bad Stefan wasn't smart enough about the phone." Meaning, too bad Stefan didn't actually wipe his phone clean and get the images off of it. Shame on Chris Sterns for saying this. I mean, to me, that means that he's saying, too bad my son wasn't smarter or he would have gotten away with all of this. Then Chris tried to implicate Jenn again by bringing up the fact that her car traveled to the dump site where Maddie was lying lifeless. Now, you may recall that Jenn, Stefan, and Stefan's father, Chris, spent the night in a hotel in Orlando while the townhome was being analyzed by crime scene investigators. And on that evening, or in the early morning hours of Wednesday morning, Jenn's car was seen driving to St. Cloud to the dump site where Maddie was laying lifeless. Chris wanted to know if the hotel's security cameras picked up Jenn walking out of the hotel, and the detective said, no, it was just Stefan. It's like Chris keeps throwing spaghetti at the wall and he wants to see if anything will stick. And each time the detective shoots him down and says, no, it wasn't Jenn. Now, according to the guy who runs the YouTube channel, The Docket, which is where I listened to this interview, he said that the reason Stefan drove out to the dump site was allegedly because he was planning to unalive himself there. Chris then brought up Jenn calling him on Wednesday morning, asking if he knew where Stefan was. She had said that she woke up and Stefan wasn't there, but the detective again knew that Stefan was alone in the car when he drove to Northport. And this is because there was an accident in Northport, and the police officers' body cameras picked up an image of Stefan alone in the car. Bad luck for Stefan that there was an accident and he just happened to be driving by at the time. And that crash site was less than a mile away from the Sterns family home. Chris believes that based on something Stefan said, that he may have driven to Northport early that morning to try and retrieve some of his firearms, which is scary because you have to wonder, was he just looking to get those to do something to himself, or was he, Stefan, planning to take Jenn down with him? That's all pure speculation, so don't run with that like it's fact. I'm just speculating, why would he need those firearms? And Chris wanted to know if they'd ever figured out if Stefan had been to his storage unit, the father's storage unit in Northport, and the detective said it looked like somebody had used the security code, but there was a problem with the dates and they really couldn't be sure. Toward the end of the interview, Chris Sterns asks the detective, "Anything for me?" And the detective says, "No." Chris definitely tried to implicate Jenn and possibly to try and get her charged with Maddie's death and get Stefan somehow exonerated. Apparently, Stefan told his father post his arrest that there was still a glimmer of hope. But Chris was like, what glimmer of hope? What's he talking about? And he still doesn't know what Stefan was referring to. Chris said he and Debbie are trying to stay positive with Stefan because they don't want him to give up. Perhaps they're fearful that he'll try something in jail. Chris then asked a very bizarre question, which was, how long does it take to look at 30,000 plus photos? The detective replies, a long time. Chris told the detective, quote, "We're just trying to get some closure to this," end quote. I get the feeling that if Stefan had asked his mother and father to help him bury the body, they would have said, "Hand us the shovels." Just my opinion. And toward the end of the interview, Chris asks once again, is there any reason to believe Jenn was aware or unaware of what was going on. And the detective replies, "We don't believe she was aware." Chris then told the detective that he and Debbie are clueless about how all of this started. And apparently they asked Stefan if there was any SA in his life. Did anyone SA him? And Stefan said no. So does knowing what Chris said in this interview change your opinion of Mr. and Mrs. Sterns? If so, let me know in the comments, and I'll see you next time on Bed Crime Stories. Did you enjoy this? If so, please smash that like button.